Prepare yourself for nameless dread. The Sinking City might be the most authentic Lovecraft game ever made. The Sinking City is the new release from Frogwares, developer of the excellent Sherlock Holmes Crimes and Punishments. In it, you play private investigator Charles Reed, a former Navy diver drawn into the mysterious city of Oakmont, Massachusetts. This sinister setup is a celebration of the works of H.P. Lovecraft, the Rhode Island writer synonymous with weird fiction stories and cosmic horror. And in this video, we'll be looking at how The Sinking City is one of the most detailed, loving examinations of HPL's works you can play on PC. It's so authentic, in fact, that only 2005's Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth and FromSoft's PS4 masterpiece Bloodborne come close to capturing the same sense of creeping Lovecraftian terror. Here are all the ways The Sinking City gets Lovecraft right, as well as one way it doesn't. First of all, we have the location. If ever there was an award given out for the dampest setting in games, The Sinking City's Oakmont would win it, webbed hands down. Barnacles encrust every surface, rotting sea life is scattered across the streets, and the perpetual rainfall recalls every disappointing British seaside holiday ever distilled into one drizzle-soaked nightmare. The subaqueous feel of Lovecraft stories like Dagon or The Shadow over Innsmouth is captured here in a way that only the most vivid imaginations could manage. Breathe in and you can practically taste the rank sea air. Every squelching footstep Reed takes through the dilapidated seascape seems to uncover new levels of despair and decay. It's the sort of place you'll want to stop and explore just so you can be disgusted by how slimy it all is. And the inhabitants too only add to that sense of corruption. Hopeless humans share Oakmont with the hybrid Innsmouthers, and the fact that most of them are happy to ignore you only adds to the sense that this is a real, honestly quite awful place. On a less obvious note, The Sinking City is rich with references to Lovecraft's writings. That might seem like an obvious thing to say since you're watching a video about fishmen and Cthulhu, but there are loads of other nods that fans of weird fiction will love, pulled from a variety of stories. Robert Throgmorton, for example, the illustrious head of one of Oakmont's leading families, owes his ape-like features to characters from the story Facts concerning the late Arthur Germain and his family. And you'll stumble across things like Brains in Jars, a nod to the fungoid anatomy-borrowing Migo from The Whisperer in the Darkness. It's also worth noting that this is an expansion of Lovecraft's work, not a straight retelling, so things that were only hinted at in the source text are expanded upon here. In that respect, it's a little like Rocksteady's Arkham games. The title is appropriate in that it takes as many characters and ideas as it can and crams them into a bespoke setting.
Drock. The Innsmouthers, do you have proof they were involved?
Lovecraft's stories often focus on a protagonist who pieces together some horrible truth from scraps of evidence and oral testimony. The Sinking City is no different. It uses a modified version of the system from The Devil's Daughter and Crimes and Punishments, in which you collect evidence and combine clues in your mind palace. Similarly, Charles Reed has some Holmesian powers of deduction. The mind's eye skill lets you see images from the past, illusions, or omens. His Follow the Omens ability tracks people and events and guides you to new locations. And his retrocognition power lets you see past events, putting them in chronological order to explain things. Then you can compile all your evidence in your mind palace and solve cases, often choosing exactly what outcome you want. It's less nuanced than the Sherlock Holmes game, and there's less chance of missing evidence and coming to the wrong conclusion, but you do feel like you've earned your resolution. There is a danger that comes with knowing so much, however. Reed's sanity suffers as he uses these powers. Like a classic Lovecraftian protagonist, the more you discover, the worse your mental state becomes.
Don't waste my time, newcomer.
On a similar note, the game really makes you properly investigate your surroundings. Many Lovecraft stories feature characters in new settings, forced to deal with unfamiliar people and places, and The Sinking City's open world utilises these themes to amazing effect. It's a large, dense game set in a swamp of urban decay. Oakmont is a difficult place to navigate, which is exactly as it should be. Paths are blocked off, streets are flooded, and you'll need to swap between travelling on foot and by boat to navigate effectively. When I first started playing, I was surprised by how prominent the options for marking evidence and quests on your map were, but this is because it's absolutely necessary. The game will give you hints about where to go next, but it's never as simple as just following a waypoint. This means you'll have moments where you get lost in the damp streets of Oakmont, and the shuffling inhabitants will do nothing to assist you. This makes you feel like a real detective in an alien city. You have to look at street names on the map and work out where places are from clues in descriptions. And if you're looking for an NPC who needs medical attention, for example, it's up to you to locate the nearest hospital. The game won't tell you, but the solutions always make sense. There are some tools to help you too. So-called hobo markings show up on doors you can open, as well as highlighting potentially dangerous areas and stashes of gear you can use for crafting. And you can find phone boxes dotted around the city that allow you to fast travel between them, but generally, getting around Oakmont is refreshingly difficult.
May the sea bless you.
As I mentioned in the third entry, Reed's sanity suffers when he uses his skills to solve cases, and his mental state is something you have to be wary about the entire time you're playing. Your special abilities will damage your sanity, as will the creeping horrors that inhabit Oakmont. Discovering sinister events will have an effect, and some monsters you encounter damage your mind as well as your body. And the sinking city's visualization of Reed's failing sanity is handsomely done. As well as the standard fisheye effect you see in other games, flashes of past traumas appear on screen, as well as half-glimpsed echoes of unspeakable alien things. You'll see a few of these repeatedly, which does lessen the effect somewhat, but they still have the power to shock. And best of all, occasionally you'll struggle to know what's real and what's not, which feels like the perfect expression of mental trauma we see in so many of HPL's stories.
Experimental medicine. Oh, I guess it can't be any worse than the asylum in Boston.
Finally, we've got Reed himself. He's a combination of various Lovecraft characters, but he's physically more capable than the professors and reporters that often serve as heroes in HPL's tales. He bears a thematic resemblance to Detective Malone from the horror at Red Hook, complete with past trauma, but it's arguable Reed is more like the hard-boiled characters seen in Lovecraft-inspired spin-off writing or the Fantasy Flight board games. And Reed is a great fit for the sinking city. He's dour, damaged and sad-eyed, but with a specific set of skills that make him seem really useful. And perhaps the most effective character trait he has is that he's a former Navy diver with deep emotional scars. This means that when you finally do go into the depths, there's a tangible sense of fear and claustrophobia. Being forced to move so slowly while flanked by murky leviathans who barely even contemplate you is one of the most perfect expressions of Lovecraftian hopelessness you'll find in any game. Honestly, it's enough to give anyone thalassophobia. And this leads me to my only real complaint about the sinking city. Reed is a capable fighter, but the combat undermines what's otherwise a very effective experience. Some of the big investigative moments are punctuated by monster attacks. Now, the combat itself isn't bad, aiming feels fine, and the scarcity of ammo means that every shot has to count, and nor is it hard enough to become frustrating. But the problem here is that instead of making things more frightening, the creatures you encounter break the tension and undermine the creeping horror of it all. One of the key recurring themes in Lovecraft is the suggestion of otherworldly forces and the fear of the unknown. Lovecraft is frightening because his works show our cozy realities being secretly undermined by things we can never hope to understand. But the combat here feels like explicit proof that monsters exist. It's no longer an unknown. Rather than being an intangible force we can't hope to resist, it's a problem that can be solved with bullets. Yes, the creatures in the game are explained away as wild beasts from the sea, but it's unconvincing, especially when the city of Oakmont has its own explorers, scientists and naturalists. Crimes and Punishments, Frogware's excellent Sherlock Holmes game, managed to remain compelling despite having almost no combat whatsoever. And I honestly think the sinking city will be slightly better without the fighting too. Fingers crossed that a mod or maybe even a narrative mode like Soma arrives in the near future.
The sea provides. Turns out we have a job that's a perfect fit for you.
Let us know if you'll be picking up the sinking city, and give this video a like if you love cyclopean structures and indescribable horror. Hit that loathsome subscribe button now for more features like this one, and remember to ring the Stygian bell of notification so you know when our next Eldritch upload lands. And honestly, that's about as much Lovecraft as I can cram into an outro.